Tonight on Mississippi Insight, 3 days left until the biggest election day in years. With an expected surge at the polls, we are examining the races on the ballot, including the biggest one, the battle for U.S. Senate. Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us on this last episode before Election Day. Election Day is this Tuesday, and here in Mississippi, polls will open at 7 a.m. They'll be open until 7 p.m. There are changes to polling places. Make sure you know where to go. We have a link to the Secretary of State's website to check your polling location at WJTV.com. And while masks are not mandatory at the polls, they are encouraged. Well, last week we talked with the new head of Mississippi's Democratic Party about the upcoming election and his plans for the state. Tonight we are getting the Republican perspective. And joining me now in the studio is Republican strategist Henry Barbour. And Henry, we're 3 days out from Election Day. And have you ever seen an election season like this one before?
I don't think I've ever seen a year like this. It's been incredible. Obviously, it does impact the election. We see a lot of people voting by mail. We see a lot of people concerned about voting in person. And we see a lot of people are completely comfortable voting in person. We really don't know what's going to happen on November 3rd, despite polls. There's just a lot of unknowns out there, Byron.
Do you expect a lot of lines at the polls come Tuesday?
I do. I think there are a lot of people who love Donald Trump, and there are a lot of people who are ready for Donald Trump to go. And so I think he's driving turnout on both sides.
And while the country is focused on the presidential race, the big issue here is the Senate race between Cindy Hyde-Smith and Mike Espy. What are you anticipating there?
A close race. They ran 2 years ago, and Cindy Hyde-Smith beat Mike Espy by about 8 points, which is a close race. And I expect it'll be a similar sort of number. So I would say to my conservative friends who want to keep it conservative in the U.S. Senate, you better make sure you get out and vote, or we could be sending a liberal to Washington to represent us. And I don't think that's what most conservatives in Mississippi want to do.
The last major campaign fundraising filing showed that Senator Hyde-Smith raising just about $85,000 over the first 2 weeks of October, compared to nearly $4 million for Mike Espy. Why is she getting so little financial support? So Mike Espy is getting a ton of money from something called Act Blue, and Act Blue is an online platform for Democrats to give from all over the country. So you see a lot of money coming in from out of state. Most of this money for Mike Espy is coming in from out of state. And these are folks who are seeing an opportunity in Mississippi to shift the Senate to liberal control, where you would have somebody like Bernie Sanders as chairman of the Healthcare Committee. So that's why you see that huge influx. Senator Hyde-Smith still has ample money to do the things that she needs to do, but make no mistake, Mike Espy is outspending her, but it still can't change the fact that Mississippi is a conservative state, and it's very difficult to get conservatives to move over no matter how many ads you might run or buy. Is Cindy Hyde-Smith getting the money that she needs to close this out, do you believe?
Well, look, I've run plenty of campaigns, and you always want more money. I will say the Espy campaign's got plenty. So you could always use more, but she has adequate funds to do what she needs to do. In recent polling that her campaign has done, they show her up by high single digits, and which is very similar to 2018. So I think she has a lead. It is not a comfortable lead, and Republicans and conservatives, independents who want a conservative Senate, better make sure they get out and vote, or Mike Espy could be celebrating Tuesday night.
So you don't believe this is in the bag for Cindy Hyde-Smith right now?
Not at all. Not at all. No. I mean, she has a lead. But, Ole Miss had a lead last weekend.
What's the difference between this race this year and compared to 2018?
Well, Mike's got more money, and he spent a lot more time, having already run, getting ready for this. And so I think they are doing a better job probably this time investing in their ground game. So from an organizational standpoint, to maximize turnout of his voters. And so I think that's a big advantage for him. Last time, Trump was in stronger shape politically. We didn't have a pandemic going on. A lot of things have changed, but Cindy Hyde-Smith's got more experience now in Congress. She just voted for Amy Coney Barrett to join the U.S. Supreme Court, and that's Mike Espy was opposed to that. So that's a clear difference. And if you want somebody like Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court, you vote for Cindy Hyde-Smith. If you don't, then Mike Espy should be your choice.
The down ballot issues in the races, what's the biggest race that you're all concerned about as far here in Mississippi as far as on the down ballot?
Well, so the Mississippi Republican Party endorsed Kenny Griffiths to the Mississippi Supreme Court, and he's in a very close race with Latrice Westbrooks, who's on the Court of Appeals, and I think we have a clear distinction here as well, where Kenny Griffiths is a constitutional conservative, not an activist judge. So I would encourage people to get out and vote for Kenny Griffiths, and that's something the Republican Party certainly cares a great deal about.
That Supreme Court district seems one of the few purple districts in the state here. Where do you see? How do you see that playing out there? Is it going to be very, very close? You think?
Turnout, Byron. Turnout is going to be key, and I will say Latrice Westbrooks likely will benefit from Mike Espy having a lot of money and having good organization. Mike Espy helped get some judges elected 2 years ago despite losing, and so turnout's going to be really key because that is a purple district, as you say, and either candidate could win this. There's no question.
When it comes to some of the ballot issues that are on there, medical marijuana, where do you stand on medical marijuana? Where do you see that playing out as far as 65 or 65A? One, do you think it's going to pass? And if it does, which one will pass, do you believe?
All right, well, personally, I don't speak for the Republican Party, hadn't taken an official position on Initiative 65. I think it would be a travesty to put illegal product into our state constitution where it would be practically impossible to change it.
The state flag, what do you think is going to happen with the state flag? Do you think Mississippians will vote on the current state flag, or do you think they'll vote it down?
I'm confident that they're going to approve the new flag, and I think it's time for Mississippi to do that. And I think, Byron, that's something as Mississippians, when there was so much division and turmoil this summer and this spring in the country, particularly on racial lines, that whites and blacks, Republicans and Democrats came together at our state capitol and did the right thing for the people, for all 3 million Mississippians. And so I'm really proud of that. And I think it's important that we vote for the new flag. It's a beautiful flag, and it lets us put this behind us.
What do you think is going to happen come Election Day? Do you think it's going to be decided by Election Day, or do you think we're going to be waiting days and weeks for the results to come in?
It depends on how close. If the national election, certainly the U.S. Senate race here in Mississippi will be decided quickly, in a matter of hours, I'll say. But the national, it could be a few days, and it could go into several days. It's going to come down to a handful of states like Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, perhaps Arizona, and we just don't know. And several of these states have 3 and even longer days to count it up. So people really need to be patient, but it's really important that everybody votes who has a right to vote. And I think whether you're a Republican or Democrat, that's an important right that we have as Americans.
We'll be right back. When it comes to COVID-19 and our response to COVID-19, are you satisfied with how the state is handling the pandemic here in the state?
The pandemic is tough, and I'm certainly, I know the governor has his hands full, Dr. Dobbs. I think they're doing what they can, as reasonable as possible. I think, the governor's trying to be respectful of people's individual rights and freedoms, but also trying to protect. And there's a fine line. I walked in here and didn't take my mask off till we sat down, with ourselves socially distanced, so we can have this conversation. So it's a tough issue, and it's terrible that it has come to our country, but it's come to the whole world. And we're suffering along, and we've got to stay smart. We've got to stay patient. Or more people are going to get sick, and unfortunately more people are going to die. There's
been a lot of debate about whether there should be mandatory mask mandates or not. Has a party taken a position on mask mandates?
They haven't. No, I mean, look, we have a Republican governor, and the Republican governor is managing that, and he's making those decisions with a lot of input from Dr. Dobbs and the Department of Health and physicians and scientists. So I feel like Tate's done a good job of trying to manage that in a way that is respectful of our freedoms, but also responsible to keep Mississippians safe.
As far as, are you hopeful that things will get better as far as COVID, as far as race relations, as far as how 2020 is going? Are you hopeful that we will see a brighter future in Mississippi and across the nation? I am.
Look, America's the greatest country on the face of the earth. We've been blessed with freedoms. We've been blessed with great resources. And I think it's critical, that Americans figure out how to work together. Americans figure out how to disagree respectfully. I don't like when politicians just spew vitriol at one another. It's not productive. It's okay to disagree. I would tell you a good example. Mike Espy and Cindy Hyde-Smith, they're both good people. They just have some clear policy differences. It doesn't make one of them a better person than the other, but it's just a matter of policy. And I think that's really important, that even when you disagree, that you respect somebody and don't think somehow you're a better patriot because you think this way on an issue or that way.
Are you satisfied with where the Republican Party is today as far as where the elections are or the campaigns are going, and what do you think the future is of the Republican Party in the state?
Well, a political operator is never satisfied till the election is over and the votes are counted and your candidate wins. So I'm not satisfied in that sense. We're working hard, through Election Day to try to make sure that Cindy Hyde-Smith wins, that President Trump wins, that Kenny Griffiths wins, and other conservatives running for office. So we got to keep pushing hard.
Are you seeing a shift in the state when it comes to politics, or is Mississippi still strong conservative red state?
Well, Mississippi's definitely a strong conservative red state, but Mississippians are independent-minded people, and that's why you can't take their votes for granted. As a Republican, the day that we think that we're going to win just because we're the Republicans is the day we're going to get slaughtered. We have to be a party of ideas. We have to be a party of principle. We have to put those forward. We have to put it forward in a way that's constructive, in a way that all Mississippians, all Americans for that matter, can hear our pitch and why we believe our ideas are in the best interests of families all across the state and all across the country.
What do you think is making it that Democrats are becoming more competitive against Republicans? Because before, Republicans just would blow them away, and now they're getting competitive. Although they haven't won statewide, but they're getting closer. What's happening there?
Well, I will say, look, just last year, Jim Hood, who Democrats knew was their strongest statewide candidate, ran for governor and got beat pretty handily by Tate Reeves. And so I don't think that Democrats have gotten any stronger really in Mississippi. 2 years ago, Cindy Hyde-Smith beat Mike Espy by 8 points. Let's see how this turns out. I suspect that Mike Espy's going to have a closer margin this time, but I still expect that Cindy's going to win by 4, 5, 6 points, something like that. So close. And part of that, Byron, I think, is a function of that Mike Espy has been able to have a lot of money come into him from all over the country, from Act Blue, the liberal platform for liberal activists to send money to red states like Mississippi or Texas or Georgia or wherever to try to impact those Senate races in those states. But I don't think all that money coming in is going to fundamentally change the state, but we can't ever take victory for granted. We've got to work hard and from the bottom up.
All right, Henry Barbour, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Byron.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Coming up, my conversation with Congressman Michael Guest. All four Mississippi's congressional seats are on the ballot this fall. There's a competitive race in District 3. Michael Guest is running for a second term. I recently sat down with the congressman to talk about the election and a reflection on what's happened in his first term. Mississippi doesn't have early voting, but absentee voting. And absentee voting seems to be up right now in Mississippi. What do you see to turn out? What do you think it's going to look like here in the state?
You know, I think we're going to have a very high turnout. I think this is going to be an election that you're going to see a large number of Republicans and Democrats both turn out in this election. You know, not only do we have an election for the President and the Vice President of the United States, we have a U.S. Senate seat which has been hotly contested this year. We've got 4 members of Congress who are on the ballot, and we have 2 state Supreme Court justices, one in North Mississippi and one in Central Mississippi, as well as other races, school board members, election commissioners, those sorts of down ticket items on the ballot as well. And we also have an initiative to legalize marijuana. So I believe that there is going to be a huge voter turnout, and I'm excited about that. I have always advocated, and I think that our republic works best when voters go to the polls and allow their voices to be heard.
When it comes to the issue of the medical marijuana, where do you see that position, and what is your position on 65? You
know, as a former prosecutor, I'm opposed to putting in our state constitution the ability for individuals to possess, the individuals for people to dispense marijuana. I do believe it is also going to be a very close vote. You and I were talking off camera earlier that this is kind of a generational type of issue to many people, that people who are our age or older are generally going to be opposed to marijuana. But the younger voters, many of those do not have those same concerns that we do. So I do think that this also will be a very close issue on the ballot, but it would not surprise me to see marijuana become legalized after the election on Tuesday.
On the state flag, do you think the current state flag is going to be on the ballot? Do you think it's going to pass?
I do. I believe it will pass. I believe it will pass overwhelmingly once the voters have the opportunity to make a selection on Tuesday.
You're running for your second term in Congress. Describe what your first term, what's that been like for you?
You know, the first term in Congress, I will say that we have encountered many challenges during our first 2 years in office. You know, we came into a partial government shutdown. We then, late last year, moved into impeachment hearings in which ultimately the House of Representatives returns articles of impeachment against the President, which he was later found not guilty of in the Senate. And then this year, we've dealt with COVID. COVID has been the #1 issue that Congress has dealt with since March. I was proud of the fact that we were able to pass a trade agreement with Canada and with Mexico that I think is going to benefit Mississippi manufacturers, is going to benefit Mississippi farmers. And I was also proud of the CARES Act, the first major piece of legislation that we passed dealing with COVID-19, that we were able to have programs such as the PPP program, which allowed small businesses to apply for loans, and once those loans were given, and assuming that those loans were spent on things such as employee salaries, on rent, on utilities, there was a forgiveness component of that. I was proud of the stimulus check that we were able to put out. I was proud of the money that we were able to put in that bill for hospitals, and the money we were able to put in there for our state government and our schools. And so during this challenging environment where we serve in a divided government, a House of Representatives controlled by the Democrats, a Senate controlled by the Republicans, we were still able to move and advance legislation forward. My hope is that after these elections end, regardless of which side ends, that Republicans and Democrats, the House, the Senate, the administration, that we can sit down together and that we can develop a plan to move legislation forward, which is crucial to our country.
What do you anticipate going forward that we're going to need to do as far as getting this country to heal?
You know, I think that we're going to have to be able to sit down across from one another, and that we're going to have to be able to carry on a conversation, and that each side is going to have to listen and to respect the views of the other party. I'm kind of like President Ronald Reagan. You know, President Ronald Reagan, it was my favorite president, and President Reagan believed that our best days lie ahead, not behind.
Congressman Guest's opponent in the general election is Dorothy Benford, a veteran of many political races. She's a longtime community activist in Jackson. She has served as a Democratic committeewoman covering wards 1 through 7 in Jackson since 2017. We reached out to her for an interview and haven't heard back. We'll be right back. Thanks to Henry Barbour and Congressman Michael Guest for joining us. Remember, Election Day is this Tuesday. Make sure you vote. Join us next Saturday for another edition of Mississippi Insight. Until then.